My first contact with unsafe health practices among the women in Nigeria was as an SS1 student. I was part of the peer educators of the lifeline education organized by the Society for Family Health in Ibadan. Then it was just more like a snapshot introduction into the concept. The last year, I was a serving corps member in Kano State. We had a medical outreach to one of the villages in Kano, Gidan Dandu, if I'm very correct. And on one of the days of the outreach, my attention was drawn to a girl between 12 and 13 years of age. She was being accompanied, seen off by her friends to her husband's house, more like a final rite of the marriage ceremony. Don't forget, 12 years, 13 years old. Questions popped up in my mind. What about the aspirations, the goals, the life ambitions, the desires of this girl? All perhaps might have gone down the drain. Then I was going through the review of a professor, Professor Blessing Imberu. She is a professor working at the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi, as in Kenya. She shared a particular story of a girl right in Nigeria, Ebonyi State. The girl is 19 years of age. She was pregnant 4 months. The women in the community came together and they told her that she must have female circumcision. That if she doesn't, during delivery, the head of her baby might touch her clitoris and then the baby will die. Of course, she was pressurized, so she had it done. Fast forward to 5 months after, she was about to deliver. Normal healing process is such that there will be scar formation. Am I correct? Yes. The vagina was already very tight. The baby could not come out. They had to resort to cesarean section, something that could have been avoided. Going forward, this lady, during each sexual affair with her husband, usually feels severe pain because of the female circumcision she underwent. These are the gory details, the stories surrounding unsafe health practices among us in this society, Nigeria. According to Ladipo and Akinso in 2002, they defined unsafe health practices as traditional or cultural practices that have adverse health effects on the individual or the victims that are exposed to them. And two major important unsafe health practices against women in our country is female genital mutilation and then early or child marriage. According to the World Health Organization, female genital mutilation is defined as all procedures which involves the partial or the complete removal of the external female genitalia and or injuries to the female genital organs, whether for cultural or any non-therapeutic purpose. We must understand something. UNICEF in 2016 made it known that this very practice is a human rights issue affecting women and girls across the world. It's a violation of the fundamental human rights of our women and girls all around us. It is something that we must speak up against. And it is deeply rooted, deeply entrenched in the cultures and the traditions in our societies, cultures and traditions that are very, very difficult to change. The burden of this problem is a very heavy one. Two professors in the University of Nigeria, that's in Enugu, they carried out a review, more like a study, and they discovered that Nigeria has the highest prevalence of female genital mutilation in the world, of course, according to them. They narrowed it down. The highest prevalence we have in the South-South, the Southeast, and right here with us in the Southwest. They even put the prevalence at 41%. That is statistically speaking. UNICEF in 2016, they carried out a review, more like a comparative study. And they looked at 1985 to 2015. They discovered that the percentage decline in female genital mutilation has just been a very slight one. Between 1985 and 2015, that's 30 years. And yet, we still have us recording like 27% of prevalence, according to UNICEF in 2013. Even according to the National Demographic Health Survey in 2013, the prevalence was still put at 25%. These are gory details, figures that we need to work with. Even according to the National Demographic Health Survey, they told us that the Yoruba race has the highest prevalence. And for the Yoruba race, it was found out that Osun State has the highest prevalence with 76 point something percent. Osun State is where we are. To tell us that this problem is actually around us. Not for any academic purpose, but to actually drive home the points I'm trying to make. I want to look at the types of female genital mutilation according to WHO. Type 1. In the type 1, they remove the clitoris of the lady, either the entire clitoris or part of the clitoris. In type 2, they remove the entire clitoris and they also remove part of the labia minor or the entire labia minor. Some of our students in schools who are doing biology will relate with this anatomy I'm trying to explain. In type 3, which is called infibulation, please listen very carefully here. It involves the removal of the clitoris, the labia minor, the labia major. Then they go ahead to suture the entire length of the vagina together, leaving a small pin-sized hole just for urine and then menstruation. It's very, very barbaric. Type 4 it involves all other havocs that they do to the vagina. That's why it's called unclassified type. It's actually more prominent in the northern part of Nigeria. It involves the piercing, the cutting, pricking of the vagina. Sometimes they stretch the clitoris. Sometimes they even cut out the entire vagina and pack it with some corrosive substances. And they all have justifications for doing this. We call them archaic justifications, archaic reasons. All of us will agree with me that the Nigerian community is a deeply cultural and traditional community. The topmost reason for this practice is culture, is tradition. Culture, according to simple definition, is the way of life of a group of people. Am I correct? Yes. So the sees as a way of life. In many of these communities, it is seen as a rite of passage. It is celebrated as a transition from girlhood to adulthood, such that if you have not done it, you are castigated, you are looked down upon. Perhaps you are not even worthy to be married out. Reasons for female genital mutilation. Some of the other communities, they believe that it enhances the purity of the lady, it makes her chaste, it makes her pure, it makes her hygienic, very clean. According to the story I shared with you from Professor Imberu, some of them believe that if the head of the baby should touch the clitoris during delivery, the baby will die instantly. Of course, that's a lie. For many of the communities, it's a socio-economic thing. Socio-economic in the sense that there are people who carry out these processes and then get money out of it. So they don't want to lose their means of livelihood. So that's why we see this very grievous practice continuing with us in our community. We should understand that female genital mutilation is something very evil, something that has to stop. Why am I saying that? Because right now, in some communities in Nigeria, they are trying to medicalize it. Medicalize in the sense that they now take the practices to health personnel, help them to cut out so that there will be less bleeding. It's all a lie. You're just trying to actually cover some barbaric practices from medical explanation. That's why we must wake up and fight against it. There are very grave consequences to this practice. These girls are young. They are very small. You see the pain they go through, the shock of the procedure. Some of the times you have to hold them down to get this thing done, because what are we talking about? Do they even have anesthesia at all? Painkillers? Perhaps no. So in the process of holding them down, some of them sustain fractures to their bones. We also talk about different levels and degrees of infections. What about the late complications? Late complications range between urinary tract infection, difficulty with passing urine, and there's one that I must explain to you. We call it the fistula. Not many people know it. Fistula is an abnormal communication between two endothelial surfaces. I will explain further. We have just two types, and these two types are very common among women that are circumcised perhaps at a very early age. We have the rectovaginal fistula and then the vesicovaginal fistula. For the rectovaginal fistula, it's an abnormal communication between the anus and the vagina, such that the woman, in an attempt to defecate, she doesn't even feel it. The feces comes out directly through her vagina. This is what happens all around us. And then for the vesicovaginal fistula, it's an abnormal communication between the bladder and the vagina also. The restraints that you normally feel when you feel pressed to go and pass urine, they don't feel it. The urine just comes out directly through their vagina. These are harrowing things we need to fight against. And I must tell you, there is no health benefit at all. No health benefit at all for female genital mutilation, from female genital mutilation. Let's quickly address the issue of early marriage. In many countries in the world, they stipulate the age of independence. In Nigeria, the age of independence is 18 years. But we still see people giving out girls out in marriage at the age of 12, 13, 14. Some of them even 10, 11. And they give them out in marriage to older men. And the reasons are not also far-fetched. Now, some of them talk about the fact that a woman must be a virgin before she enters her husband's house. And then in many of the communities, being a virgin actually accrues a very bigger bride price. So for some of them, it's a religious thing. For some of the social cultural thing, it's just part of their cultures. All these things are evil. And the implications are also there, particularly the health implications and the psychological implications. For the health implications, I'll just run through them. Sexual. These girls are not yet mature enough to engage in sexual intercourse. And that's why you see them coming down with several degrees of coital lacerations. That's why they also are at the risk of fistula formation. They can also have the fistula that I described earlier, the rectovaginal fistula or the vesicovaginal fistula, as the case may be. What about the pregnancy complications? They're not yet ready. No, the bodies are not yet mature enough to accommodate pregnancy, but they have been forced into it. So you see them coming down with different levels of anemia, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and so on and so forth. And what about the trauma of being married to a man you don't love? What about the agony of having to stay all your life long, knowing that you're conscribed and constricted to just that life? That's why we have to wake up and fight these very bad practices in our community. Where do we go from here? Until 2015, there was no legislation against female genital mutilation in Nigeria. Now, what's the implication of this? This very delay in the legal recourse against female genital mutilation is responsible for the decline, the slow decline we've had in the progress, the slow progress we've had in the decline, rather, of female genital mutilation in Nigeria, such that even as at the point of speaking, the figures are being put between 27 and 25%, which is actually very big. But in 2015, the law came up, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. It criminalizes every form of female genital mutilation and cutting. That's that. In 1990, the Marriage Act puts the minimum age of marriage at 21 years of age. The Child Rights Act of 2003 puts the minimum age of marriage at 18 years. But if you look across our communities, you understand very well that not all our people are actually adhering to this legislation, making us to come to one main thing, that the issue of addressing these evil practices goes beyond legislation, rules, and government regulations. It is multidisciplinary. It is something that we must take to the grassroots. Something that I must join my voice with your voices, and we speak up so that people can understand that these practices must stop in our land. How do we go about it? We must join our voices in the campaign, the crusade, to say no against female genital mutilation in our country. Apart from that, we must make sure that we inquire in our communities. Find out in the community where you stay about these harrowing practices, these terrific practices, and make sure you educate and inform people about it. And students are here today. Let's also take this education back to their classes and tell them about these harrowing, very bad practices. Besides, we must also work together with organizations that are fighting these practices. And we must discuss with our legislators and our law enforcement agencies to ensure that the laws are obeyed by both the makers and also the people that the laws were made for. I believe with these practices and with these grassroots decisions and options and opinions, we are going to be able to stem the tide of female genital mutilation and early forced child marriage in our country, Nigeria. Thank you very much.